Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Monday everybody. Just as I begin to record this, Beijing has published its official Q3 data. We remember last week Beijing postponed the release of this anticipated data, which combined with other factors, led to a very poor market performance last week. We will discuss the official data as well as unofficial metrics in tomorrow's economic-focused episode. But let's start with today's video. One major theme which we have been following closely this year on China Update is the unfolding local government fiscal crisis, a slow-moving issue which, if mismanaged, threatens national fiscal security and could well be much more devastating than the current property crisis. Of course, as both crises are systemic, they are interdependent and thus are mutually exacerbating each other. Several financial outlets have produced excellent reports on this very theme in recent days, so it's worth re-examining just how bad the local government fiscal challenge is. So let's begin with budget deficits. As we can see, based on official government numbers, so of course the situation could be much worse, local governments have been running deficits on general public budgets. We note that China's fiscal system includes a transfer mechanism from local governments to the central government, and that outside their general public budgets, local governments also collect extra budgetary revenue. More on this shortly. What we can see here with these numbers is not healthy, obviously, and the situation has greatly deteriorated this year. In the first 8 months of 2022, the local fiscal self-sufficiency rate, the ratio of general public budget revenue to expenditure, was 51.7%, the lowest in the same period in more than a decade, according to financial outlet Yicai. According to data published by the Ministry of Finance, during this 8-month period of this year, total revenue for local governments' general public budgets dropped 6.5% year-on-year. Local fiscal expenditure grew at a faster pace too, as local officials had to meet growth targets and roll out expensive zero-COVID measures, which of course we've been following for months now. Indeed, analysts with Chinese financial outlet Caixin, who have provided some of the great graphs we're looking at here, point out that the large divergence in revenue and spending is also connected to sporadic but incessant flare-ups of COVID-19. Quote, in Jilin province and Shanghai, where major outbreaks took place earlier this year, general public budget revenues dropped 37.3% and 14.2% respectively in the first 8 months. End quote. In the first 8 months too, the country's total public health spending grew 8.9%. As mentioned, the interwoven housing crisis has exacerbated the local fiscal strain at both ends. Reduced activity in the construction and real estate market means less economic activity to tax. But of course, the big hit has been to the extra budgetary revenue from land use sales at the local level, which, before the Evergrande meltdown last year, represented around 1/3 of local government revenue. And this is average. Some cities it's lower, in other, especially poorer regions, it's much higher. This year, local government income from land sales plummeted, tumbling 28.5% year-on-year in the first 8 months, compared with a 12.1% increase during the same period last year. Quote, currently, we've completed less than 5% of our goal for land sale revenue this year. This has caused so much pressure that I can't sleep at night. End quote. So what are local governments doing? Well, they only really have 3 options outside of flat-out refusing to meet their legal obligations: reduce spending, increase borrowing, and sell assets. So far, we have seen the first 2 being adopted, with local governments being much more hesitant to take the third option. Local officials know that asset sales are a one-time option. They also know that with selling state-owned assets, this means giving away some political power. And of course, especially in lower-tier cities, many local officials are part of that wider network of powerful, entrenched interests which own and operate the assets. Despite all this, however, we have seen some examples of desperate local governments selling state-owned assets. In August, for example, a major city in Hunan, southern China, announced that it was offloading idle state-owned assets to, quote, ease its tight fiscal situation, end quote. A city in Sichuan province made a similar move the month before. However, so far we have not seen a major push for asset sales, with total sales to date being very modest and only sporadically implemented. A growing number of analysts, however, believe that we will likely see the central government in the coming years put more pressure on localities to sell assets in response to these fiscal pressures. Some argue that this is because Beijing understands the economic need to do so. Others argue that it will be to reduce local entrenched power versus the central government. As such, we will likely see a much more adversarial relationship form between local and central government in the coming years. And if the current property decline is structural rather than cyclical, then we should also expect this local government fiscal pressure to mutate into full-blown crisis on a scale much bigger than Evergrande. Hey guys, if you like what I'm trying to do here with China Update and you'd like to help me keep this channel sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. This is the best way to support the channel, as it's just me making these episodes every day. If you like today's episode in particular, don't forget to hit the like button. As always, thank you so much everybody for the ongoing support. Next up, in a shock move to some, Qiang, the party boss of Shanghai who oversaw the financial hub's 2-month lockdown earlier this year, was elevated to the number 2 spot in the country with the announcement of the new Politburo Standing Committee yesterday, Sunday. Li is considered a close ally, perhaps supporter is a better description, of General Secretary Xi Jinping, who has emerged from last week's 20th Party Congress more powerful than ever. The 7-member Supreme Politburo Standing Committee is made up of Xi's men, and many suspect that the strange removal of former leader Hu Jintao during the 20th Party Congress closing ceremony on Saturday was an intentional display of power. Qiang, who had previously acted as Xi's chief of staff from 2004 through 2007, was for many a surprise pick for the premiership. Quote, "Honestly, I did not have him on my list. Well, it seems to be that they feel confident doing it in their way, and it remains to be seen if it works out." End quote. The Chamber of Commerce president expressed that he, like others, had expected Hu Chunhua or Wang Yang to be tapped as the next premier, but both these more reform-minded leaders were not even picked for the larger new 24-member Politburo. Li's pick also breaks with tradition. Quote, "Tradition is that somebody who becomes premier must be vice premier before. This is totally against party convention. We have not seen Qiang introduce any market-oriented reforms." End quote. Though we should note that Li has promoted the greater economic integration of the Yangtze River Delta region and oversaw Shanghai's so-called free trade zone expansion. During his time as Zhejiang's governor, local business sentiment was considered to be good on balance. Xi's economic czar, Vice Premier Liu He, who was the lead negotiator during the Trump-era trade war between the US and China, endorsed Qiang back in 2015. But of course, like we just mentioned, Li was in charge when Shanghai went through its devastating 2-month lockdown earlier this year. For some analysts, the rise of Qiang indicates one thing. Quote, "If Qiang really becomes the premier, that means she is potent." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. I will see you all tomorrow.